As you taught us, Rafi, in our father Jacob's epic wrestling match, commentators have speculated on the identity of his mysterious sparring partner. Is it Esau, his estranged brother, with whom he has tangled throughout his youth? Is it a divine messenger, perhaps Esau's guardian angel? Or perhaps, as you suggested, it's an eternal conflict, an existential wrestling with Jacob's own self, the negative side of his personality. Until this point, Jacob has considered life to be a zero-sum game. His gain is always someone else's loss. His victory, someone else's defeat. His relationships have been dominated by the twin demons of envy and deception, rivalry and trickery. Even in the womb, he struggled with his brother. And from the very moment of his birth, he has wanted what his brother has and has schemed and planned to get it. As the second-born child, Jacob grabbed the heel of his older brother as they came into the world, as if to assert his dominance even at the moment of his birth. As Eva Zornberg writes, Jacob comes from behind, the position of the hunter, tracking his prey from the rear. The Torah describes Esau as a skilled hunter, but if we read the story psychologically, Jacob is the real predator here. Jealous of his brother's position as the firstborn and heir, Jacob outwits the slower-thinking Esau, bribing him with a bowl of stew to gain his birthright. Then he disguises himself as his brother and tricks their blind father into giving him the blessing meant for Esau. And later, in a power struggle with the unscrupulous Lavan, Jacob eventually outwits him as well and schemes his way to wealth. He marries two fiercely competitive sisters whose rivalry mirrors his own struggle with his brother. And Jacob is now a middle-aged man whose life on the outside looks good. He has flocks and herds and a very large family. But everything he owns, he has achieved by grasping and taking what belongs to others, by lying, cheating, and manipulating those around him. And so, on this dark night of the soul, at the climactic moment of our Parsha, Jacob is an isolated figure, stripped of his family and possessions, which are now on the other side of the river. Vayivater Yaakov levado, Jacob was left by himself. Alone in the night, the Torah tells us, he is suddenly attacked. Vayavek ish imo ad alot hashachar, a figure wrestled with him until the break of dawn. The word for wrestle, vayavek, has the root aleph vet kuf, a root that in Aramaic means to intertwine. Rashi explains that in our verse, vayavek means he fastened or joined himself onto the figure before him, as a wrestler would do to throw their opponent to the ground. The image of the two figures wrestling is one of intriguing ambivalence. They are in competition, but they are also holding each other close, embracing, even as they struggle. If we reflect deeply on Rashi's translation of Vayavek as intertwining, we might read this episode quite differently. Perhaps Jacob, even as he wrestles, is struggling to intertwine with another, to connect with his fellow man. He wants to be close to another person, intimately connected in relationship. We can imagine Jacob as someone who has kept people at a distance his whole life and avoided vulnerability. As someone who cheats and has been cheated himself, he's distrustful of others, suspicious and cynical in his outlook. In this encounter, he grapples with the man he has been and the life he has led, and he gets close to someone else. Their limbs are intertwined. For the first time, Jacob experiences a different kind of relationship. Jacob and this mysterious figure are equal partners in their match, facing each other in this dance. As they converse, it's not clear from the verses who is speaking when exactly. And just as their limbs are becoming entangled, their words too become mixed up. The wrestling match ends inconclusively. There's no clear winner or loser. At this moment of deep vulnerability, Jacob is injured in the hip. It is a wound he will carry with him the rest of his life. But strikingly, it is the moment of growing close, of being vulnerable to another, that Jacob feels the sacred in his life. After it's all over, he calls the place where it took place Peniel, the face of God. He says, I have seen the face of God, and my life has been saved. Even more striking is what happens the next morning when he and Esau reunite and embrace. Jacob looks upon Esau's face and says, Ra'iti panecha kirot panei Elohim. To see your face is like seeing the face of God. He finally sees Esau as his brother and realizes that through their bond, he can encounter the divine. Jacob has learned a profound lesson. Through loving relationships, through holding others close, we can feel God's presence. One traditional abbreviation for God's name is to write it as Yud Yud. As an old saying goes, when there are two Yids, two Jews, sitting side by side as equals, the divine presence is with them. When one is above the other looking down, God is not present. Jacob had to come down from his sense of superiority. He had to recognize his brother's humanity and be in relationship with him in order to find God. He had to overcome his intense competitive drive, his resentment of the blessings that were Esau's, before he could sense the sacred in his own life. This is a lesson for all of us. Life is not about winners and losers. It's not about beating someone else or dominating them. A life enriched by the divine presence is one that is rich in relationships. We share our lives with others, open ourselves to each other, give and receive as equals. And even the best relationships are marked by disagreements. Sometimes we'll struggle and even wound one another. But it is through close relationships that we grow, as Jacob grows and gains a new name, Yisrael. At the end of his wrestling match, Jacob asks for a blessing. This time, he seeks to win his blessing through honest encounter. So may we find meaning and blessing by intertwining our lives.